Beforehand, I want to announce our new host. Besides Gene Chip Tatum and Professor James Fetzer, Dr. Rima LeBeau and Ralph Fusitola, Eli James, Gary King, Lorian Fenton, Ole Demigard, and attorney Larry B. Kraft will be aboard all next week. So you want to check out the schedule. Also, our BT new writers is doctors. It's former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, and it may be 2 weeks premature calling her doctor, but she is a doctor. Professor James Fetzer, Scott Bennett, who's on with us tonight, Gene Chip Tatum, of course, myself, Stu Webb, Dr. Rima, attorney Ralph Futuciola, Dr. William Croft, Dean Henderson, Larry B. Kraft, Eli James, and Gary King. And if you haven't noticed our new website, veteranstruthnetwork.com, take a look. We're full magazine, radio, and with your help and support in this matching fund drive that we're doing this month, of the $5,000, we have $2,000 of it. We need $3,000 more dollars in the next 20 days, folks. And we have a matching donor, and we'll be able to buy our fancy TV software and also the software we need to secure this so we don't have any more of these kind of homeland security problems or Israeli Mossad. And from what I see on my website, it seems to be a combination of the attacks that are going on. Anyway, with that said, I have on the distinct honor once again this week to have former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. We'll be calling her doctor in 2 weeks, Dr. Cynthia McKinney. And I have Dr. Scott Bennett, a whistleblower, on tonight. And Cynthia thought it'd be a good idea to have this show. And with that said, welcome both of you.
Well, thank you so much, Stu, and thanks for letting me come on again. After just a few days, it seems like I was with you. I stayed all night. And I was even surprised myself. And I think that tonight we're going to have a great show because we've got this great guest. I don't know how much you know about him, but I only heard him doing an interview, and I was so intrigued. I said, oh, Stu has got to have him on and give me an opportunity to hear him in person, up close and personal. So I guess I'll let you do the introduction of Scott Bennett, but I think this is a great show.
I don't know how to introduce him. I know he's a whistleblower, and I had a long talk with him today, so why don't we let you, Scott, introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm happy to. My whole background I put up on a website where I'm documenting and putting up all my reports to Congress and the military, so you can read all you want about me at www.armypsyop.wix.com/Scott Bennett. And you can Google Shell Game by Scott Bennett, and it'll bring you up to the website and the webpage and the book. Basically, I was a Bush administration person from 2003 to 2008. I had moved out to Washington, D.C. from California to work in the political world and got my doctorate in political theory and a master's in public policy and economic development, and had lived and worked in D.C. from 1998 to 2011 until I fell down the Alice in Wonderland hole and went on this wild adventure. And I had seen Cynthia up on Washington and Congress, and I love her. I think she's hot, she's smart, she's aggressive, she's everything that a political person really should be, who swears an oath to the Constitution and seeks to lead their fellow citizens. And I was so blessed by you, Stu, to make the introduction, and of course Cynthia to invite me on to have a conversation. I was just tickled, and I thought, wow, she very well could be the only politician on American soil that has the courage to have a discussion about the subject matter that I discovered in my military circles, in my contractor circles, and have been trying to get up to American political leaders and military leaders for the past 2 years. And they've been dismally and frightfully, and if not treasonously, failures in their oath to the Constitution. So Cynthia is the only one I think worthy of calling a statesman and a leader. So I'm intrigued and delighted to have this conversation.
Maybe we ought to make her the next president of the United States. Cynthia, if you give me the job as Attorney General so I can handcuff them all.
Well, I would vote for her. I would certainly vote for her.
I would too. She's a constitutionalist.
Yeah.
We don't have any. All we got is a bunch of shills up there right now.
Yeah.
But what happened with you, Scott? Tell us the whole story. And this is roundtable tonight, so Cynthia, jump in here. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and let you two bounce back. How's that?
Okay.
Well, I had, make a long story short, I had been brought out of the Bush administration when I was from 2003 to 2008. I was doing economic development. I was doing a lot of initiatives for domestic policy and families and the health and human services side of things. But I started going into the counterterrorism realm, and my background had been in advertising and communications, and I did a lot of work in that. And the military Pentagon people had seen me and invited me to come over. And it's funny, one of the nexus points Cynthia and I have is I went to a town hall meeting with Rumsfeld and General Myers at the Pentagon, and I dressed them down, and I've got a video of it, but I dressed them down to say, our whole psychological warfare platform is failing, and why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we aggressively engaging these levels of the Islamic identity and things? And I was going in trying to win a war that I had been told, quote unquote, had been started by planes banging into our Twin Towers and Pentagon. And my subsequent learning of a lot of that changed radically much later. But I had went in and gone against Myers and Rumsfeld, and soon after that I was contacted by Colonel Jeff Jones, and he said, I want you on my team. I'm setting up a Booz Allen Hamilton Special Operations Psychological Warfare team. And I like what you said to Rumsfeld and Myers.
Serving just 7 years for the
and he brought me on board. I left the Bush administration. I went into Booz Allen Hamilton, and then started being groomed for a level of psychological warfare, strategic communications, defense contracting work. I was at the State Department, I was at Special Operations Command, and I was at Central Command. I had a top secret SCI clearance. I never discussed any of the classified material, but I only discussed what was unclassified that I discovered much later. That had it been known and discovered in the military channels, they would have classified it top secret. But because it came to me accidentally, they have no grounds to classify it. And I'm convinced getting this material out to the American citizens is absolutely essential to, one, keep our political and military leaders accountable, but also to get our country out of the morass and the tar pit that we seem to be stuck in, and that we entered into in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq. And it spread like a disease, like a leprosy, consuming the good reputation of the United States. We've been, hurt from the Libya to the Iraq to the Syrian to the Egyptian campaign. So I found myself in some interesting circles, and I had went down to U.S. Central Command in Florida, and I was a terrorist finance analyst. I was tracking the money supply. I was tracking the banks and the hawalas and every courier and every system that terrorists were using to fund their operations. European banks, Swiss banks, Sakani banks, Middle Eastern Gulf states, everything. Looking at narco trafficking and all of those target lists. And I found myself butting up into a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of incompetence, a lot of defense contracting double talk, where they try and get contracts multi-layered and expanded before they do any work. And I was also given a direct commission in the Army. So I was brought into the Army to help their psychological warfare department and improve their capabilities. And it was interesting because I went into the military as a contractor, not as someone looking for identity, not as someone looking for a job, but as someone who's looking to use the military to serve our people and finish a war, not to join and become part of the military, but to improve it. The military exists to advance the interests of the people of the United States. The people of the United States do not exist to fund the adventures and wild cowboy games that certain people in the military and the Congress feel obliged to use them for, John McCain being one of them, and a whole host of others. So I found myself at U.S. Central Command in Florida, butting up to a lot of bureaucracy, and I was filing a lot of reports and finding a lot of incompetence and things that were even, almost flat out treason, I thought. And the next thing I know, I'm stopped at the front gate, I'm arrested, I'm thrown into a jail cell, and I'm interrogated by military police, and they said was stopped because of a DUI, and there was no DUI. I thought it was a test. I thought it was an actual examination where they were determining my strength and capabilities, and if I was able to endure deployment, for special operations or deep covert operations. And next thing I know, I'm accused of being on base illegally, and my housing paperwork wasn't done properly. And I'd said, well, that's not my job. My battalion set this up, and I'm a defense contractor, and I'm a reservist, and I'm down here doing classified orders. And they said, no, you're barred from base. And Booz Allen Hamilton fired me within a day of this stop at the front gate. And it was interesting because my boss at U.S. Central Command at Booz Allen Hamilton was Dov Zakheim. Dov Zakheim was, of course, the comptroller that lost or conveniently relocated $2.3 trillion. And, Cynthia, I'm sure, has a lot to say on Dov Zakheim, his connection to Donald Rumsfeld and Myers and a lot of the military industrial complex. But he had fired me and had hired me previously. And then I was indicted and charged for making a paperwork error. They called it a false statement, and wearing my uniform, a law that is only applied to civilians who don't have any military connection, but they applied it to me because I was a reservist, and having my gun safe moved on to base, and they hadn't registered it. They had arrived a week earlier when I was in training. So they had these ridiculous charges, and I thought it was, again, all a test. I thought it would be thrown out. I thought it was, I was told by the attorneys that I'd hired, oh, this is just a misunderstanding. And next thing I know, I go to court, in a civilian court. I'm not given any military defense. I'm not given the chance to testify. None of my documents had been submitted by my attorney. I was basically showing up without anything. And next thing I know, I'm convicted of this false statement charge and immediately thrown into a prison. So I was sent on a bus around the country and finally wound up in Pennsylvania, where I ran into sort of a divine intervention. I ran into a Swiss banker who, amongst a whole bunch of other interesting characters who were in this federal camp prison. And the Swiss banker was Brad Birkenfeld. And Brad Birkenfeld had disclosed 22,000 bank accounts, 4,000 or 5,000 of which had been investigated. 19,000 had not. And they were filled with terrorist financing, Saudi financing, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, all the Sunni Gulf country financing accounts of terrorism, and amongst other things like money laundering and offshore accounts and tax havens. So I said, Brad, I can't believe no military person ever talked to you, ever debriefed you. And he said, nope, not one time was I ever debriefed of any of this material. And he told me his story over 6 months, how he had been targeted by the CIA when he was in Geneva, Switzerland. Incidentally, Edward Snowden was part of that operation and had reported it to Glenn Greenwald. And Snowden had described how the CIA targeted the Swiss banker and got him into a DUI situation. And Brad Birkenfeld had told me exactly the same story, and he had told other people that too. And all of this has never been looked at, was never reported. until Brad and I wrote up a letter to General James Mattis and other military figures, and then sent it on to the Congress, to the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Judiciary Committee. I sent it to over 150 senators and congressmen, and not one of them ever responded or did a single thing about it, never investigated any of my reports or me or requested more information. The only person to respond was Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul. And he wrote 3 letters saying you need to take this up to Pennsylvania, etc. But since then, I kept expecting this to be exposed, and Brad Birkenfeld had been released from prison and had gotten out, and next thing he was paid $104 million and went silent. And he was paid that money on September 11th, 2012, the very same day as the Benghazi attacks. So I submitted all of this material up to the Benghazi investigation people and everyone who was looking into the terrorist intelligence information pertaining to ISIS and ISIL and Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. And mind you, I wasn't a car mechanic. I was a defense contractor. I wasn't an ice cream man. I was a military officer with a top secret SCI clearance. So you would expect someone who would be debriefed and questioned, it would be someone like me. Not one time. Not one time did anybody from Capitol Hill, from the government agencies, or from the military ever debrief me. And I wrote up to all the media too, everybody at Fox News, expecting their flag-draped patriotism to respond like knights on a white horse. They would come and say, "We can't believe this happened to you. What have you got to say?" Not one person from Fox News ever contacted me, nor from any of the other media networks. And the only one that accidentally contacted me was Michael Isikoff. And they came, Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger from the Washington Post came and interviewed me for 2 hours. And I gave them all this material, gave them all the documents, and they sat stunned and turned pale and didn't know what to say, and left and never reported a single word of it, and never returned any of my documents either. And the other journalist who was looking into it was Michael Hastings. And Michael Hastings, about a month or two after he started getting the material, ran into a tree and a thermite charge somehow blew up in his car. So I started writing all this and trying to get it out. I was just released from Pennsylvania in February, and I'm still fighting the court case. I go back to Florida, in which I'm going to bring all of the material and the evidence that accumulated from 2010 until now, and expect the entire case to be reopened and thrown out. But even more interesting is the bringing in of the subsequent information from Brad Birkenfeld and Dov Zakheim and all this terrorist financing issue. Most recently was a Florida conference that they held this week down called the Offshore Alert Conference. And that was a collaboration of all of the major financial institutions and hedge funds and all sorts of colorful characters. And Brad Birkenfeld had been invited down to talk about UBS, and there was also an HSBC whistleblower, and Dean Zerbe, who had wrote the whistleblowing law, and he was Senator Charles Grassley's staffer at the time. They all went down there, and I contacted the conference and said, look, if you're going to be talking about this and talking with Birkenfeld, you should bring up the terrorist financing side of things, and bring up the fact that all of these financial systems and networks are being used to fund our current, enemies that our military operations are engaged with. And the director of the conference, a guy named Dave Merchant, his email was marchant@offshorealert.com. He responded that I was out of my mind and delusional, and no one would want me at the conference, and blah blah blah. So I've shared all this in Facebook. I've shared it in posts, and it's astounding. But we see very clearly the lines in the sand. You have those who participate in these corrupt practices and the cover-up, and those who look to expose it. And I'm simply exposing it, telling the truth, doing interviews, writing this material up, and the next step is to go into court. So I'm very enthusiastic and happy that someone of Cynthia McKinney's character and level of power and influence and her experience in Washington would see this as a legitimate issue that really does warrant deeper examination to protect our military people and our citizens and to hold people accountable and to say to fellow members on Capitol Hill, why haven't you done anything about this? Why haven't you investigated this? Why haven't you helped your constituents? How many constituents have kids fighting in the Middle East wars who are getting blown up by bombs that are being purchased with money through Swiss banks that's been going on since 2012? That's the day I look forward to. So I'll stop there and happy to go on.
Scott, it's mind-boggling. The life you've led, the story you have to tell, because it's unimaginable that you're actually talking about our government. You're talking about, and I try to remind people that the government is supposed to be us, not them, and that everyone inside the government is an institution that consists of individuals.
Yes.
And so governmental decisions are basically the decisions that are made by individuals. Those individuals have names, addresses, telephone numbers, and we can find them. We can reach them. And so, our responsibility as attentive citizens is to hold them accountable. Now, you were on the inside now, and now, I almost don't know how to start. I've got a zillion and one questions, and I guess I'll just get started and ask you some questions and then, hear your responses. But first, you say you're going to court. Let me back up one. How long were you in prison?
I was taken out of prison on July 11th. I'm sorry. I was taken out of court on July 11th. July 23rd, 2011. I was sent into a federal prison right from the courthouse, and I was not released until January of 2014. So, what is that, 2.5 years?
Okay, now let me ask you about that experience. Was that just a regular, normal prison experience, or was that in some, what they call the luxurious prison for white collar people?
Yeah, it was a camp, which is Pennsylvania camp called Schuylkill, and it was what you would deem a white collar camp, but you also had guys who had been working their way down. It was a minimum security prison. So you had bankers and lawyers, doctors, stock fund guys, and that's where I met Brad Birkenfeld. But they got me up there in a 6-month route in a bus. I was sent out to Oklahoma and then Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania. And I saw some horrific things with people who've gone through the prison system and the treatment of, prisoners. And it was quite an education. But the eventual camp that I arrived at was a minimum security camp in Pennsylvania. And that's where I started writing on a typewriter every day, trying to get the military to step in and look into this. I thought it was a big misunderstanding that something had happened, wires had been crossed, and I was going to be released in a matter of weeks and months at the latest in order to get the appeal, in order to get the military to look in, because I thought they were totally operating on a wrong information level. And that's when I ran into Birkenfeld, and I said, my God, I can't believe that you went through this, and this is my job, tracking terrorist money sources. How come I didn't meet you? How come they didn't bring you to me? How come I didn't see all these bank accounts? I had to come to prison and discover all these Swiss bank accounts and guys like Abdullah Aziz and Saudi funders and Bahrain and Qatari funders and Kuwaiti funders of all this stuff. And he said, Scott, and he didn't know what to say at the time. He was in a daze because he never thought he was going to be thrown into prison. He had a hell of a story. But anyway, we got together and compared notes, and I said, we need to get this up the chain of command. We need to get it to Congress. And he said, we will get out, and I'll go to the Senate, and I will demand a hearing, and I will bring you in as the military expert and we'll lay all this out. And when he got out, I was fully expecting the whole thing to kick in. And the next thing you know, his lawyers show up and the lawyers say, we're just going to get you paid. We want to get you out of the country. And here's $104 million. And he's went quiet ever since.
Well, wow. I don't even know how many zeros that is.
Yeah.
A bigger payoff than they offered me. God, they only offered me $7 million.
You're not worth very much, Stu.
I know.
Oh my goodness. And they didn't offer me anything except they didn't put me in prison. That's the only thing. So I guess I
dumb
can
enough
be
not
thankful
to take it.
But okay, so now first of all, Scott, tell us, I mean, you have this new identity that you've acquired because of your honesty and your innocence. But a part of your identity is that you've got to be a family man. How has this ordeal affected your family and your relationship with your family members? Just, to be human about this as well.
Well, I'll tell you, Cynthia, when it first started, when I was first in court, they started throwing all sorts of accusations at me, calling me an imposter, saying I had dressed up in a police uniform at Fort Myer, which was total lies. And I came to find out later that actually CIA and Wackenhut had been putting this together with the Department of Justice. And the judge, they pulled that back at trial, but they had thrown that against the wall just to defame me and make me look crazy.
Yes.
And they did all these lies and all this nonsense and calling me an imposter and all this BS. And I never saw a lot of this at the time, but my family had seen this and couldn't believe it. And when I put into prison, I said, don't believe a word you're reading. Do not believe the media or what you're reading on the internet. It is complete lies. And I'm going to sue everybody who's been a part of this till they bleed from the ears because they're making up all these false accusations about me. And it was very hard for the family to go through it because I'd never been in trouble. I mean, my God, I served my country. I went into the military to serve my country and win a war, not to get paid, not to get find an identity. I was 38 years old. I had went into officer training. I was one of the oldest guys who went into officer training. And half the guys were saying, Bennett, why are you going through this? Because I want to enhance the military's capability to perform psychological warfare and strategic communications and intelligence analysts. That's why I have a master's and a doctorate. I can speak Spanish and I've been in advertising. I've worked in the professional circles for 20 years. Now I want to give it back to my country. That's why I went out to work in Washington. That's why you went to serve in Washington.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I'm accused of all this nonsense and BS and dogpiled, and the Army just let me out to dry, didn't come in and investigate this, didn't give me any defense. And they got away with throwing the Department of Justice under Eric Holder and Laney Brewer and Sarah Sweeney and the Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, and my lawyer, David Shalala, who was Donna Shalala's nephew, as he told me. They all just basically threw me under the bus. And it's taken 2 years to get into an ineffective assistance of counsel legal appeal position. But I'm going back into court to say this should never have happened. You violated every military member's rights by doing this to me, because I was on a military base, I was a military reservist, and I was a defense contractor. I wore two hats. And everything that they did to me, the stop at the front gate, and then the paperwork for my military transfer, all that stuff was just totally corrupted in the court. And they violated the law on how they performed this whole thing. And then going to prison and then trying to fight my way out of it. Luckily, I had some very brilliant lawyers who were with me in the prison system who educated me very quickly on writing legal motions, writing legal analysis. And it was like being in a think tank. And I had some wonderful, brilliant men, and I won't go into their names because I don't want them hurt or
Yes.
punished. But
Yes.
some of them were, brilliant. A guy named Scarecrow who educated me on the whole 9/11 material. And I saw this and I started connecting the dots. And I said, my God, I never really knew this or that. And I started to look into it. And when I got out, I started being contacted by some very intelligent people who had experienced similar things, like Susan Lindauer, Barbara
Yes.
Honegger,
Yes.
Richard Gage, Alan Saprosky, and I just started making these connections and having conversations. Rebecca Roth, and you can't run from the truth. And if you're honest, and if your heart's in the right place, and that is, you want an honest government, you want an honest country, you don't want a global military industrial complex that's going around destroying other nations just for the sake of war and getting paid for war, but you're looking to live in peace and prosperity. When you start discovering all this skullduggery and these criminal actions, you report it, you fight against it, and you speak out. So
Yes.
I'm happy to debate everybody on planet Earth if they try and accuse me of misspeaking or any deception. I'm 100% honest, and here's what I know, here's what I discovered, and I think the American people really need to know about this, and they want to. And I never talk about anything classified. I never talk about what I did in specific operations or specific intelligence. I'm very careful because I honored my commitment. I honored my security clearance, and I honored my fellow members in the uniform. But there's also the need to speak out, to hold accountable the people who ran the agencies that were involved. I mean, in my book, Shell Game, you've got a list of all the Congress people and a copy of the letters that was sent to them. And it's inexcusable that they didn't respond, that they didn't do something, because that's what they occupy the seat for. They're political leaders with top clearances. They have the right to go into the Pentagon and the CIA and the DIA and the intelligence apparatus and the State Department and audit all of this and examine it and say,
That's right.
is Bennett telling the truth?
I
want to add something here, if I may, Cynthia. Next
Sure.
time you do this to you, Scott, if they do, how I got out, same thing. Lawyers locked up with me. Here's some of Leonard Millman, my accuser, death threats, terroristic death threats that never happened. Here's some of his bankers' attorneys in jail with me in Springfield. Stu, file a bill of particulars. Nail them.
Yeah.
That's what got me out.
Yeah. Yeah, thank God for the lawyers that were in there. One of the greatest guys.
And it does that until they get locked up,
Yeah. One of them was one of the guys with me in Pennsylvania, brilliant lawyer. I won't tell his name, but he was friends with Johnny Cochran, and man, he was originally from Jamaica and went to Britain and then come to West Virginia and tried to fight some of the crazy racism that was going on. Next thing you know, the judges and the prosecutors came against him and threw him in prison. But he was there and educated me in the law. Beautiful man.
Wow. So is he, like, for example, would he still be there, or is he out now?
Yeah. He's tragically there because his lawyer totally failed to say the words at the hearing that said, he was a lawyer representing a lady who had been entangled in drugs. And the money that she paid him as a lawyer, they said was money laundering. And he said, whoa, I'm an attorney. I'm representing her. You can't charge me with money laundering.
Yeah.
And his lawyer said, Your Honor, I don't know if it was attorney-client money. And that right there got him put in prison. And he was fighting and writing motions to the Supreme Court saying, you can't do this to a lawyer. That's why we're allowed to represent clients who are in drug charges. The money they pay us, you can't call money laundering. And yet they did it, Cynthia. They got away with it. And I love the guy, and all the guys I met, I will still love to the day I die, and I'm still there for them because they helped me. But it's tragic what I saw and what these poor souls were going through in the prison system.
Welcome to the real courts of America.
Yeah.
I understand, not from firsthand experience like you, Scott, but from my reading of the COINTELPRO documents and the Senator Frank Church investigation on intelligence activities against U.S. citizens, and abroad, the reports. And one of the ways in which these sensitive cases are like deep sixed by the government is through the lawyers. Did you get lawyers that you trusted? Or did your lawyers end up betraying you? And, you know, what kind of legal representation and relationship with your lawyer do you have now?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, because the lawyer that I had was a guy named David Shalala. He was referred to me by another guy in Florida who was handling this the original DUI charge. I had this lawyer, and I said, there's no DUI charge. They're making this up. Mm-hmm. And he said, and then he said, I'm going to bring in another lawyer. I'm going to bring someone else in. And then he bowed out of the case. And the lawyer who he brought on was David Shalala. David Shalala was the nephew, at least he told me, of Donna Shalala, Bill Clinton's Secretary of Health and Human Services.
It was one of Hillary Clinton's former lesbian lovers while she was First Lady, too.
Yeah, well, that certainly wouldn't surprise me. But he came on, and I told him, you know, this whole thing is crazy. I don't know where they're getting it. And he never put on any defense. I sent him reams of paper and reams of orders and everything that was associated with my case. And I didn't know what was classified and unclassified in a court setting. I'd never been through this before. And he said, oh, it's not going to go anywhere. It's a big misunderstanding. I'm connected with McDill. Don't worry about this. And I'm thinking, well, this guy's connected. He's going to make it go away. He's going to write the right letters or clash cocktail glasses with the right general and say, you know, you're barking up the wrong tree. And next thing I know, he never did. He never did anything. But here's something he did do a couple weeks ago. Right out of the blue, he calls the probation office in San Francisco or whatever and accused me of misrepresenting him by creating websites pretending I was him. So,
oh my goodness.
He's accusing me of creating websites pretending that I'm David Shalala. And I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. This guy is either crazy or he knows that a 2255 ineffective assistance of counsel is coming up before the Florida courts, and he's going to be dragged in by his hair and demanded to give an account, demanded to answer questions connecting Dov Zakheim, Booz Allen Hamilton, terrorist financing, Hillary Clinton, Brad Birkenfeld, everybody who's connected with this whole saga, he is going to be requested to give an answer for. So him doing that, I think, is a bar violation. I've written the Bar Association in Florida, and I've complained, and I've made this official, and I've written it up in legal motions. But it astounded me when he did this, because it confirmed that there's a lot of funny business going on and people trying to keep this covered up. I mean, yes. Possibly that's why you guys are getting cyber attacked. That's why they're trying to shut these radio shows down, because this is explosive stuff and you couldn't make it up. I keep saying that, but you really couldn't make this up. And I certainly never made it up, and I never planned this, and I was never part of a secret operation, but it was part of my nature when I discovered things that were wrong or that were corrupt or were stupid. I always attacked them. I always tried to improve upon them. I always tried to draw attention to them. And running into the Swiss banker who had all these secret accounts that were connected to Lanny Brewer and Eric Holder and the law firm Covington and Burling, because they represented Union Bank of Switzerland. And Lanny Brewer and Eric Holder were the attorney generals and the assistant attorney generals at the time. Lanny Brewer has since went back to the law firm Covington and Burling. Michael Chertoff has went back to Covington and Burling. All of this stuff, as a terrorist finance analyst, trained in tracking money, everything Birkenfeld gave me suddenly made my lights go off like a 4th of July firecracker parade. And I said, wow, we've got to get this up to the right authorities. And no one did anything. And they just covered it up, and they've been absolutely silent. So again, I'm so pleased that the powers and the divine, air has sort of brought Cynthia, because I've seen her in fights. I've seen Cynthia in action, and there's no one, I don't think, that can really stand against her when she gets up to a podium and starts asking questions and looks people right in the eye.
That's right. Okay, well now, it's interesting because I was reading a document just a few minutes ago and it just disappeared from my screen. I have no idea what happened. But anyway, you mentioned a lot of names, and so I'd like to go through these names that you've mentioned. You mentioned Booz Allen. Excuse me?
Oh yeah, I would love to.
Okay. You mentioned Booz Allen.
Yes.
And you mentioned Ed Snowden.
Yes.
Did you ever know Ed Snowden?
Well, for the interest of legal protection, I don't go into the details of my knowledge of Snowden. I just say, as I've written, Mr. Snowden saw my report on terrorist threat financing, exposing Brad Birkenfeld's Swiss bank connections. He saw that in his TSSCI channels. He was working in Hawaii. I know the team members that he was working with and what they were doing. And he went to Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald within 2 months after seeing my report bouncing around the TSSCI channels. And then he went public and left the country. But soon after, he reported the Swiss bank CIA operation against Birkenfeld that I had reported in 2012. So that's where the connection is. And a lot of this seems blurry, but the more you kind of read into it and see it, you see the connections.
Okay, so I recall, I haven't seen Citizen 4, but I recall that Laura Poitras mentioned that there was another whistleblower. Was that whistleblower you?
Well, again, I won't go into too much of the details of that yet, but it's still forthcoming, Cynthia. It's still coming out, and I've put on the website a video of all the interviews that I've done, and one of the best ones was with Sean Stone, who was Oliver Stone's son. And he and I go into a little bit of Poitras and Greenwald and Snowden. I like to keep the bad guys guessing. I like to keep them off their heels and what they don't know and what they do know.
Right. And if I'm inquisitive, so I'll ask a question, but you don't have to answer it because I definitely understand the circumstances. You also mentioned WikiLeaks.
Yes.
And now, what is your knowledge of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange? Because in the very, very early stages of WikiLeaks, there was a lot of I guess you could call it doubt about the authenticity of, I guess maybe the sincerity or whatever. Do you find, I've gotten into trouble, in fact, with my PhD. That's why my finish date is a little bit blurred now because I used some WikiLeaks documents and then the Barrett Brown conviction came up and everything went haywire. Yeah. So, did you find WikiLeaks to be reliable and authentic?
Well, I did in the particular case and study that we were doing. Brad Birkenfeld had WikiLeaks cables sent to him, and they were very powerful because they exposed the State Department communications targeting Birkenfeld for prosecution, and the Department of Justice, State Department, really racketeering and conspiracy to prosecute an American citizen for bringing whistleblowing material about crimes being committed against the people of the United States of America. That's how you really understand this and connect this. The WikiLeaks cables that Brad showed me were authentic because I was at the State Department when some of the WikiLeaks cables targeting him were released. I was at the State Department in 2008. And I laughed and I said, Brad, you're not going to believe this. See these WikiLeaks cables? I was here. I was at the State Department.
Wow.
And it blew me away, Cynthia. I mean, I looked up and said, God, is this just a wild adventure you put me on? Did you do this for a reason? I mean, I'm looking back going, where have I come from? I've come from all these agencies. I mean, I was in the Bush administration and, I was at Heritage Foundation and I was always more conservative than the average bear that I found myself in. But I kept finding myself going to these interesting locations and agencies, and I was very aggressive. I was very, talkative, and I'm pretty, just active. I was in government to serve. I wasn't there for a job, and I was very hungry to fix things. And when I found myself in prison with Birkenfeld, looking at these WikiLeaks cables, I couldn't believe my eyes because it was perfect. I was the only one in the country who was at the State Department at the time of these WikiLeaks cables, and I was talking with the Swiss banker who had smuggled diamonds and toothpaste and brought over all of these accounts to Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer, and then to the IRS and the SEC, and they all threw him out. And then he finally got into Carl Levin's office in the Senate Permanent Subcommittee, and Barack Obama was in there too, and a few other colorful characters. And then they prosecuted him with that material that he divulged in a closed session hearing, and he told me about it. But the WikiLeaks cables, aside from Julian Assange and his motivations, I just look at the facts in the black and white documents, and I see the cables that I knew when I was a global psychological operations analyst. And I know everything the State Department did, and I know everything Special Operations Command did. I wrote half the platforms for interrogation and PSYOP and all sorts of colorful stuff. But it just blew me away when I saw this in prison. And I said, my God. And probably, Cynthia, that's what scared the hell out of these congressmen and senators and military people, because they go, here's the report right here. And I sent it to them, and they must have said, holy shit, how did this happen? Who is this guy? How did he get there? What? And they must have just thought we're in the middle of a vortex. And they just, their fear kicked in, and they said, we're not even going to touch this. This is so hot, so radioactive. It shows severe incompetence because we violated this guy. We threw this officer in prison. He was a defense contractor. Yes, he's loud, he's bold, he's writing, he's fearless, he's a pain in the ass, whatever you want to call me. But he's not given up. He's still on mission. My mission was to track bad guys and their money sources. And I was doing it. And I wasn't giving up. And I found the banker and I said, give me everything you got because we're taking this forward. And he was given new life, and we wrote letters and everything, fully expecting this to be brought back in front of the Senate and all sorts of other investigative committees and the Inspector General and the Military Inspector General and Gates and Feinstein and Buck McKeon and Howard or Mike Rogers and all these guys. And not one single person, not Ray Odierno, not Martin Dempsey, not Jeff Jacobs, none of the guys in uniform, nor anybody on Capitol Hill did a single thing. And they're still not doing a single thing. And I will never let it go because I know there are young kids who've been hurt and killed and maimed because these Swiss accounts have been left to continue to operate. And worse, they're still funding and metastasizing into the Islamic State, the ISIL, the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and now it's being used to cultivate aggression in Syria. Yes. And if that goes, welcome to the real World War III. You got Russia and you got China and you got Iran all pissed off at the United States because we're turning the whole Middle East into a wild pissed off beehive.
Scott, I'd ask a question here. Who do you think is actually behind and what you've seen as far as this money laundering, where it came from? Once more for the listeners, because some of them tuned in a little bit late because of this cyber terrorism we went through getting started late. Who were the countries that were funding ISIS and Isla and whatever you want to call it in the Middle East? And who's really running those operations over there? And does it connect to the CIA?
Oh, well, absolutely. You've got CIA, you've got Mossad, you've got other Israeli intelligence agencies and U.S. agencies, but the CIA Mossad organization is the key. You've got Swiss banks that are the easiest to funnel money through because they're invisible. They're dark. You don't have to have names or account numbers. Susan Lindauer and I have talked extensively about the Swiss accounts and combination of numbers and things being changed. And CIA has a lot of accounts through USBS or UBS as well as HSBC. And all of those are very easy to be used by Saudi, Gulf state, Sunni, Sufi, Gulf state nations to fund money into the Sunni evangelism of by the sword into this this Middle East region between Iraq and Syria, and it's been there for a long time. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not a new group. This is simply a coagulation of peoples really that have been disrupted. Their villages have been burned down in Libya. Their villages have been burned down in Cairo and in Iraq. They're no longer really functional. So what do these guys have to do? They follow the religious impulse, the evangelism to go serve, Allah in the crusade, and they're enabled by the money and the resources and the ordnance that is provided by U.S. sources. And there's a lot of invisible, U.S. sources. I know some of the bank accounts that Brad showed me were directly from Saudi Arabians. And I won't go into the details of who or why because I don't want bad guys to know. But there were 19,000 bank accounts that had not been shut down yet. And it was phenomenal, and I would say treasonous, because a lot of those accounts were being used in the operations that you still see ongoing. And then complementing that, you've got planes dropping ordnance and food and I mean all sorts of arming, aiding and abetting the enemy.
So we talked off the air earlier today, and we were talking about HSCB Bank, and for the edification of the listeners. Yes. That is owned by and run by Great West Life out of Inglewood, Colorado. And that's my former father-in-law, Leonard Millman, and his partner, Larry Mizell, and Daddy Bush's attorney, Norman Brownstein. Now, they were the ones that, created all these artificial mortgages, $100 trillion worth, and derivatized them worldwide. Some say in government is as high as $3 to $5 trillion. They don't even know, 1,000 trillion. They don't even know how high they derivatized them. And, this is also Great West Life controls 42% of all the pension funds in this country that they bought recently in September from J.P. Morgan, bought their entire block. And they control the other block through Fidelity Financial, which has the same set of characters running and owning that place. So, they're able to manipulate these markets. And HSCB Bank, as far as I know, there's 2 countries still after them for money laundering. Overseas. I think it's Germany and Italy. Both are after him. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. It comes back to the same Jewish AIPAC organized crime syndicate that's directly tied to the Bushes and the Clintons.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dirtiness about that. I know HSBC, Carl Levin had released a report on terrorist financing in July of 2012, 1 month before Birkenfeld was released. And in that HSBC report, he said nothing of terrorist financing that was coming through HSBC bank accounts to some of our military conflicts, the connection to UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland. Didn't mention UBS at all. And yet his report is supposed to deal with terrorist financing, and he doesn't mention one word about Union Bank of Switzerland, the biggest terrorist financing bank of all. And Brad Birkenfeld, who had brought that material to Carl Levin, never mentioned that at all. And it was within 2 months after that report that I hadn't seen at the time, because I was in prison. I hadn't seen this report. I didn't know it existed. But within 2 months, I filed my report to Carl Levin and the Senate and Congress and the military, bringing all this out about Birkenfeld and his story and his 19,000 accounts and the CIA targeting him and the connection to Snowden and the connection to WikiLeaks, just for the sake of trying to get people to start looking into it and start debriefing me and start setting this up for a further investigation, because it encompassed Benghazi. It happened on the same day as Benghazi that he was paid off. Terrorist financing accounts. I'm the expert in terrorist financing. I know how this is done. I've been trained in it. Contact me for details. And they didn't do a single thing. And Levin's report was just a product of, half truths. And Rolling Stone came out with a few months later of their report on HSBC. And I wrote Rolling Stone and told them, you've only got half the story. They never responded. Michael Hastings got a copy of this, and he started looking into it. He had done some reports on McChrystal and PSYOP. But soon after that, he was killed in a car explosion. So there's a lot of things that were in flux and that were happening and that were connected with different people. But the major failure has been the political and military and the media. They failed to look into any of this. They failed, and they refused to report on it.
Scott, you mentioned Feinstein and Levin.
Yes.
And of course, I don't know if you know or not, but Senator Feinstein has come under great fire from her California constituents for enriching herself at the expense of the taxpayer through the business activities of her husband.
Yeah.
You interacted with them, or at least their offices, both Feinstein and Levin.
Yes.
How did you find those congressional offices?
Horribly incompetent, refusing to do any leadership, do any investigations. This was a serious issue because men are being killed. Military kids are being killed and maimed. So this is not just, hey, I'm upset about a bill, or I'm upset about something in politics and I'd like you to pay attention to my opinion. No, this is a report from a military whistleblower reporting to you intelligence about financing that is getting to terrorists who are killing the sons and daughters of Americans of the United States. When are you going to contact me? When are you going to meet with me? And they never did. They shuffled it around. They played the hot potato game. And I never received any letter or confirmation or phone call from Feinstein, from Boxer, from Boehner, from Mike Rogers, I've got a whole list of all the people that I sent it to that I'm happy to read to you.
And in addition, Levin produces a report that's supposed to represent the kind of report or the kind of information that you had, and it doesn't mention anything that you gave them, which seems to me to indicate a conscious whitewash.
It is. That's why it's even treason. It's treason against the United States of America because, Cynthia, when you raise your hand and swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution, you took it as a congresswoman. I took it as a military officer. I also took it when I was in the Bush administration. But we take that very seriously, and the public entrusts us with certain expectations and duties. And one of those is when you discover intelligence information from reputable sources that are indicating American sons and daughters are being killed, then you do something about it. You certainly contact the source, and you certainly examine the materials to discover if it's truthful or if the person is crazy and should be locked up. And they never did. They never they left it alone and didn't touch it. It was like a dead cat on a table. They didn't want to even acknowledge it was there. And I had been writing for 2 years at a typewriter every day, furious not to let it go. I was not going to be buried. I was not going to be turned away. I was not going to lose heart. I was going to keep hitting that drawbridge because I knew and I know it is going to fall down in a spectacular crash. And every one of these politicians who've been trying to keep the door closed is going to be dragged out, tarred and feathered, and possibly worse if it comes that they knew about this and purposely covered it up. Emails don't lie. Electronic records are there. Server records are there. The WikiLeaks cables prove that. And the WikiLeaks cables laid it all out. Here's the State Department. Here's Hillary Clinton negotiating with the Swiss to throw Birkenfeld in prison so they can get preferential treatment on Swiss bank treaties. The Swiss and all those communications in the cables. And it was astounding because here's an American citizen and the government under Hillary, and this isn't a Democrat-Republican thing. This started under the Bush administration. The worst of it was the Obama administration just kept towing the line. They didn't nip it in the bud. They didn't correct it. It was started under Bush and it just continued. And it was sort of heightened because everybody who took over in the Obama administration, Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Hillary Clinton, suddenly they're entangled in it. And, Robert Wolf, chairman of the Americans of Union Bank of Switzerland, jumps on board Obama's finance bundling committee. So there's all sorts of, questions and donations. It's going to be very interesting when all of the electronic records are eventually dug out and found that can be put in front of a courtroom, because everyone that I sent letters to, I fully anticipate subpoenaing and in a Freedom of Information Act saying, send every single document that lists Scott Bennett, second lieutenant, United States Army, whistleblowing report, terrorist financing connection to Union Bank of Switzerland and Booz Allen Hamilton. You send everything you've got on that subject. Anything that mentions Bennett's name, you send it in for the court to examine, because right there you'll have lots and lots of senators and congressmen that could be panicking, trying to cover this up. I'd like to think there are some who don't know about it, who will know about it now, who will know about it through you, and say, my God, I never knew about this, but I'm going to be the American patriot, the statesman, the leader that people elected me to be, and I'm going to expose this. I'm going to hold people accountable. I'm going to help the sons and daughters of my constituents who are in uniform and stop them from getting killed. I'm going to find out where this money's coming from and shut it off. If it's being funded by AIPAC or Mossad or CIA, I don't care. I'm a congressman. I'm a senator. I am going to lead my country because that's what democracy is supposed to be all about. The people make the laws, not this illuminated aristocratic class in Washington, D.C., and everybody else is a peasant. That's what this police state is slowly trying to, I think, encroach upon us. But this could be a game changer. This could be a major paradigm shift issue in the whole, government of our country.
But now, Scott, electronic files can be disappeared.
Well,
I just lost something off my computer just now as I was looking.
Yeah, they can, Cynthia. You're right.
And Scott, I don't want to sound negative, but the United States Congress, in my opinion, and the United States Senate up there, I don't know any of them. I think it's just a big whorehouse right now.
Yeah.
Cynthia McKinney says she knows one person that's clean and honest. The rest of them, as far as I'm concerned, they're a bunch of cheap whores sold out to AIPAC.
No argument from me.
But now let me ask you this, which is not on my list of questions, but it comes up in what you've said. And, is it possible for an honest person to run a campaign on purely financed by the people. So that means that the campaign would be considered in, professional circles underfunded. But is it possible for that kind of campaign to be run and won, or are those days totally over?
No, I don't think so, Cynthia. I think it can be. I think at the end of the day, it's your magnetism, your charisma, your intellect, your heart that stands up at a podium or speaks in the alternative media or speaks to the internet and can rally Americans and leaders within those rallies to say, I mean, you have a right to tell Americans, if you hear my voice, I'm Cynthia McKinney and I'm running for Congress, I need you to go out to your churches and your community groups or whatever, and you need to help me. If you believe in this, then you need to vote for me. But in today's world of big money, you need to help toe the line.
Yes.
And they have a responsibility and a duty if they want to live free. If they don't, they're going to be victimized by their own sloth and their own stupidity. But you as the leader are standing up saying, pick up and act like a leader and lead the charge and help me win this for, all sorts of reasons. So I don't think big money is the crucial litmus test. They try and make it seem like it is, and I think that's propaganda. I think they purposely do that so that good people like yourself will sort of turn away and think, we can't really win. I don't believe that at all. I really don't. I think if you remember, as you know, all politics is local.
Yes.
So all you need are the high schools and the churches and the community groups, whatever they are, and maybe launching yourself as an independent. I mean, at this point in the game, I look at Democrats and Republicans, I'm thinking, maybe it's better to go run as an independent and say, I'm not loyal to any party. I'm loyal to the interests of my constituents and what I believe. And I'm smarter than the average bear. I've got a doctorate. I've studied. I've been around Congress before. And I'm also not looking to be paid and bribed. I'm looking to fix serious problems and not just make a lot of noise on Capitol Hill. I think the more, and women in this country really have more gumption and fight in them, sadly, and I say that as a man, than most of the men I've seen in this political fight. Women have been the ones who've contacted me saying, Scott, I took your letters and materials and I went to a town hall meeting with it. No men have done that. Not one single man has done that. Women have done that. Women have stood up at town hall meetings and taken my documents and said, Congressman so-and-so, what have you done about this? I just put one up in the links, a gal from Colorado. And I've said it. Women are the only ones with the guts and gumption and the Amazonian warrior spirit or the impulse to defend their nests and their children and their future. And they're walking the walk. Men, I haven't seen much from them. I'm always hopeful, but women have an interesting power in this regard.
Scott, I'm in agreement with you. Probably about 7 out of 10 of my supporters over the years have been women. And that's the truth. They've been out there and they've been doing things and they've been very active and so forth, and I see it among it. And maybe it's because some of them are housewives or whatever, but most of them haven't been. Maybe that's part of the numbers, and they're picking up where maybe the men are leaving off. But I don't know. It seems to be that the women issue, and I think you have the concern, the nesters. I think you're correct in that area.
I think women have a natural disgust of spiritual corruption. Women have a natural aversion to these backroom deals and money. And some, not all. I mean, some, like Feinstein and others perhaps, live it and love it. But I think women perhaps have a greater sensitivity to the damage that sort of culture and atmosphere long term will have on their own lives, where, men, a lot of them it's all about whoever has the most toys and most money at the end of the day wins. I don't think that ideology is as predominant in women thinking.
Scott, I don't want to get partisan, because at the top they're all the same.
Yeah.
But in the rhetoric of one of the political parties, they talk about privatization.
Yeah.
And from what I see, though, is that privatization has gone crazy.
Yeah, it has.
And so now we've got critical national security issues.
Yes.
That are being controlled by private corporations, plural.
Yeah.
And they have their own interests, they have their own issues, and those issues and interests are not necessarily U.S. interests.
Right.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, Cynthia, one of the things that if you were up on the Hill and I called you and reported this to you, you'd be absolutely infuriated by, and that is the fact that Booz Allen Hamilton, a major defense contractor, has on its top floor in McLean, Virginia, and Reston, all sorts of top secret documents from various U.S. intelligence and military agencies that Department of Defense couriers have been legally allowed to bring over. Now, how many of those documents, top secret, have been looked at and used and copied and shared with other parties to the detriment of the United States? And
Yes.
when I say detriment, they simply can look at a briefing and look at material and say, oh, here's how we can use this, or get ahead of it, or spin it, or whatever. So you have defense contractors, Booz Allen Hamilton, and others, SAIC, CACI, Celestar, but just for my experience, Booz Allen Hamilton, you've got top secret documents being looked at by contractors, and there's nothing good about that. And I saw it in my time at CENTCOM when I'm told by Dov Zakheim and his people, you will not take your information or your suggestions to military commanders until we have revised contracts. So they're saying to me, Scott, you will not add your thoughts to the military war plan until we get more money. Yeah, but guys are going to get killed if I don't put this out there. Well, we don't care. We care about our contract. That's essentially what they are saying. And that's an example of what you just identified, privatization run amok. And war and conflict has now been privatized in defense contractors. Of course, it's nothing new. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned against was there. But the military is no longer the sole occupying force in the theater of conflict. It's occupied by military, defense contractors, international defense contractors, international military under NATO or whatever the U.S. Ally is. But suddenly war becomes a profit, war becomes a pastime, war becomes an operation, without any regard to, is this war that we're going and doing in Yemen or doing in Libya or doing in Syria, is that going to have a blowback in which Americans are going to be killed in Texas or California or Alaska or wherever some pissed off person who lost their whole family, 5 or 10 years ago is going to get some sort of revenge, or someone going to be run over at a crosswalk that you never hear about, that's never reported because someone's furious, or some other, black flag propaganda thing similar to what they were talking about in the 60s, where they were putting forth ideas to Kennedy to sink or blow up an airliner and blame it on the
Operation Northwoods.
That's right. That's right. Northwoods, and all of that is an example of the military-industrial complex run amok.
And they actually did it in Operation Gladio.
Yeah.
In Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, so now on this same issue of the privatization, Booz Allen is a U.S.-based company, I presume.
Yeah, Booz Allen Hamilton was run by the Carlyle Group. Now, here's something else that's interesting. The Carlyle Group owned USIS, which was the company that did the security clearances. And it also owned Booz Allen Hamilton that needed the security clearances. So here's the Carlyle Group owns the company that gives the clearances and the company that needs the clearances, and then plugs them in to the various military commands to serve as, the contractors. And there's an example of the incestuous relationship between the military and their contractors. The big one, the Carlyle Group, which I won't get into their connections to the Bush family and
Yes.
9/11 and all that other stuff. We know that. But it's something the American people, don't know. But the Booz Allen Hamilton, I mean, I'll never forget it's almost borderline Caligula, parties and Christmas celebrations where you had military guys invited to, the Christmas party at the, Dulles Airport, the big Dulles Airport that they had way out there with all the planes and all the hangars. They rented out that whole thing. And, it was millions and millions and millions of dollars to cultivate and lobby military people to join Booz Allen afterwards and simply go through the revolving door. Leave the military, a lieutenant colonel, join Booz Allen Hamilton, and plug right back into your command with the people that were underlings to you when you were a commanding officer. That's their business model. And the only people who could stop that are congressmen that expose it and senators that
That's
expose
right.
it.
That's right. So now let me ask you this. Are there any foreign-based companies that have access to...
Yeah.
And
I worked a lot with the British and Australian, the Five Eyes nations. You had a lot of Washington, D.C. Contractors and intelligence companies, and a few of them were ex-SAS and ex-British military. I knew them. I knew a lot of them personally. We went out drinking beers in Washington together before I went down this rabbit hole. I mean, I was part of the whole community. I saw all this, but I was operating under the understanding that, hey, we're in a war and we're trying to finish it and we're trying to win, not we're trying to just expand contracts and expand, money and leverage one contract into another. It's like making World War II endless, right?
well, now, Scott, let me ask you to make a fine distinction. I talked about foreign-based companies having access to. Are there any foreign-based companies that would have control over U.S. national security?
Well, in Booz Allen Hamilton, Mossad was renowned to have a lot of operatives within Booz Allen Hamilton. You had a lot of dual citizens. Rabbi Dov Zakheim was an example. So you had Mossad operatives and people in Booz Allen Hamilton who had access to the top secret documents that I just identified were in the vaults upstairs in the McLean, Virginia office and the Reston office. So technically, they may not have had, Mossad Incorporated with its own corporate tag renting an office, but you had people associated with the group that were working with and for Booz Allen that were up there that had access to see all those documents, which means they have access to copy them, which means they have access to take them out.
Yes.
So it's not something they publicly advertised, but it was there. Scott Ricard is a good old Air Force analyst who's done a lot of talking about the Mossad connection with Booz Allen. But it's there. It's definitely there.
Now, you mentioned Hillary Clinton's role.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a little bit how the State Department under Hillary Clinton affected your situation and that of Birkenfeld?
Well, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State during the Birkenfeld prosecution investigation. She inherited some of the State Department targeting of Birkenfeld. Birkenfeld had been identified in 2008 State Department cables and others. That's the thing. A lot of these cables from WikiLeaks and elsewhere haven't exhaustively been drawn out yet. There is still a lot of material that they're going through that no doubt will be brought out also that could be even more damning. But the State Department cables of 2008 were very clear and that Birkenfeld was being targeted, and he was he was prosecuted in the courts in, I think, 2009. He was sentenced in prison in 2010. I don't have the whole timeline and details in front of me, but her State Department, she was Secretary of the State on September 11th, 2012. On that date was when Birkenfeld was paid $104 million.
Was that 12 or 13?
That was 2012. Yeah.
Okay.
It was September 11th, 2012. Brad Birkenfeld was paid $104 million. And you can Google this too. You can bring up these dates and they jump out. Wall Street Journal did all this stuff. They never anticipated all this other stuff. They never anticipated Birkenfeld and I being connected, and they still don't. They're trying to cover it up or hide it or ignore it. But when I saw this, I started immediately supplementing my reports to State Department, to the military and the Congress, saying, you know, you're investigating Benghazi. I wrote Saxby Chambliss and Jason Chavez, Alan West, all these people. I wrote them saying, you're doing an investigation of Benghazi. You need to look at this material. Brad Birkenfeld, $104 million, CIA, IRS, connections, links. The Benghazi thing is connected to it. Contact me for details. Contact me for additional information. I was expecting them to want to look at the WikiLeaks cables and all this, and they never did.
You reached out to Saxby Chambliss?
Yeah.
You reached out to Johnny Isaacson? You reached out to my Georgia guys?
Yeah, I did. I'll read you the brief ones I got here. I reached out to Mike Rogers, Senator Feinstein, Howard Buck McKeon, Duncan Hunter, John McCain, Carl Levin, Darrell Issa, Jason Chavez, Charles Grassley, Peter King, Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, Eric Cantor, Henry Waxman, Mike McCall, Michelle Bachmann, Dana Rohrabacher, Marco Rubio, Orrin Hatch, Pat Roberts, Jeff Sessions, Angus King, Jim Risch, Saxby Chambliss, Ruppersberger, Dave Reichert, Kelly Ayotte, John Thune, James Inhofe, John Coburn, military people, and a few other congressmen and senators on here.
Well, you just the whole APEC crowd are part of it.
Yeah, well, I wrote them multiple letters. I wrote them the September 25th, 2012 was when I wrote my whistleblowing report that I also included in this Florida court. I filed a motion in Florida court demanding to be immediately released. It was entitled Defendant's Motion for Termination of Detention, or on the alternative, Bail Pending Appeal, to allow him to provide intelligence information essential to United States national security concerning terrorist financing and its current connection to National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Union Bank of Switzerland. Brad Birkenfeld report to U.S. Department of Justice, Central Intelligence Agency, U.S. Senate, U.S. Central Command, and U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command. The case number, which anybody can bring up in the court Tampa PACER system, is case number 8:1-CR-14-T-33AEP. That's 33 Apple Echo Paul. That's the case number of the Florida court system. That's where I filed this motion in the United States District Court, Middle District of Florida, Tampa Division. And I sent copies of this. I had it notarized. I sent it to Congress. I sent it to the military. And no one did anything. The motion was denied. So I was left in Pennsylvania prison. But it was astounding because that was my mission in the military and the defense contractor world, was finding this money supply. Then I found it. Then I started throwing it up to members of Congress and the military, and no one wanted it. No one got back to me. No one responded. No one asked for additional information. Nothing.
With that thought, let's just hold for a minute, take a break. Let's take a 5-minute break, get some coffee. And this is Stu Webb, and this is VeteransTruthNetwork.com, folks. And my two special guests, Scott Bennett, Dr. Scott Bennett, and I'm going to say former Congresswoman And we're back, folks, for the last half an hour here. This is Stu Webb on the VeteransTruthNetwork.com. Check out our new site. And my two special guests, Dr. Scott Bennett, a federal whistleblower, and former Congresswoman Dr. Cynthia, doctor to be in 2 weeks. And I'm going to let you get back to it, Cynthia. You sound like you used to do when you were up on the Hill. You have a friendly witness here.
Does indeed.
Well, okay, let me just dive in again. Are you familiar with Sibel Edmonds?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, when she talks, she mentions the word treason a lot.
Yeah.
And, these are people who, people stand up when they walk into the room.
Yeah.
These are people who are supposed to be among the most important political personalities in the USA, which makes them among the most important political personalities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Would you also use that word treason?
I would. I can't discover a better word. And I'm very exact in my technical proficiency of the English language, and treason is the most descriptive of those words to describe the actions and the intentions of the military political people who have been given this intelligence information. This is actionable intelligence that could save lives of American military personnel and contractors, as well as foreign ally military personnel and contractors. And yet they've done nothing. They've conspired to cover it up. They've conspired or been depraved indifference towards it, and that's resulted in damage against our military people and damage against the Constitution. And their constitutional oath requires them to respond to material such as this. And that treason is really what they've done. And I'm prepared to argue that at any Senate, Congress, military hearing, board, table, anything at all. I will go up and talk to anyone on planet Earth, regardless of the position they hold, because if they've known about this, then they have no right to occupy that position and claim any authority. Because I can guarantee you, if you were in your position, Cynthia, and we're having this conversation in your office, you'd probably say, Scott, I want every document you have so we can vet it. We can make sure that everything's honest and everything's kosher and everything's accurate. And then we'll determine if there's grounds for moving forward on an official congressional action. We will do it because the Constitution requires it.
Yes.
These people on Capitol Hill, they may not like it. They may not want to be brought out into the light. They may have Swiss bank accounts like John Boehner and some of the other people. They may not want to disclose it. But you know what? It's not about what they want. It's what the people of the United States, what's in their best interest, and what the Constitution demands of an officer in the government and a military officer in the military. And that's the only motivation that I've had in making these revelations public, is as a military officer and also someone who's worked in government. And I can't sit still because I know of the damage that this is doing to our people and our country. And it's shameful that the people that we entrust with power and we trust to do the right thing and to exercise judicious discretion and intelligence and boldness, that's why they have clearances to go in to the Pentagon and the CIA and drag this stuff out and investigate it. And they haven't done it. And if they haven't done it, then get out of office. You're fired. And you better hope you don't get hung for treason, because your ineptitude, your incompetence, your depraved indifference, or your cover-up, your hiding of this, has caused men and women to be killed, as well as trillions of dollars to be wasted.
Yes. And speaking of wasted dollars, the Tea Partiers aren't the only ones who are maliciously targeted by the IRS. I think that fate is visited upon all whistleblowers. Has that happened to you?
Well, in my relative newness of coming out, and most of this has come out after I've been in the military and government, so it wasn't a part of my function at the time. That's why I'm sort of in a different camp, because had I still been in the military, had I still been in government and I disclosed all this, they may have treated me in an entirely different way. But because I was already on the island of misfit toys, they really had no grounds to accuse me of violating anything. I wasn't violating my computer system or oath or anything at a government desk. I had discovered this and I started reporting it. And that's different. And luckily, that's different. That gives me the grounds to say, hey, I'm simply reporting something to you. Now, I think if they came against me, it would even generate more publicity, and that's what they don't want. That's what they're looking to avoid.
Now, Birkenfeld got this $104 million. I'm trying to put myself in sort of his shoes, and I'm wondering what the psychology is. You know of just huge treason.
Yes.
That has resulted in tremendous loss of life.
Yes.
And really a theft of the future of so many people here and there.
Yes.
And also what has happened as a result of this is that I don't know the character and the personality of my country anymore.
Yes.
And so my identity as a U.S. citizen has been shaken.
Yeah.
Because what does it mean to be an American? And the question I've asked so many times, I guess rhetorically, is who are we? And who have we become? Now, if I don't know, if I had $104 million and they told me go away and disappear, I might just say, I got $104 million. I don't have to disappear. I can stand up and speak up. What do you think Birkenfeld's ultimate decision would be? To remain silent, or?
Well, he can't, because he's going to be dragged into a courtroom to give answer and testimony before the court in response to my legal action that is pending before the court. And in addition, the civil lawsuit against Booz Allen Hamilton and the Department of Defense, which is pending. So my legal actions in court are going to subpoena him and every single congressman and senator and military official who's been reported on this matter as material that is relevant to the case. So it's sort of like, the tar baby syndrome. They're stuck to me in a sense, and I'm going to pull them into court and say, assuming the judges are honest and assuming that
that's a big assumption, though.
It is, but we always have to act faithfully and honestly and transparently, because that's what the American people expect. That's what, the American people want to believe. We don't want to be so cynical that we make the natural suspicion we have of the corruption of our government. We don't want to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy by playing into they're all corrupt. No, we want to hold ourselves on a higher level on complete honesty and transparency. And then the court of law is where we will get it. That's where we will present this material. And I will present Birkenfeld and his document and all of the witnesses who knew him, who saw his material, who saw us together, who saw the reports that were written, everybody in the military and U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command, Colonel Jeffrey Jacobs, Colonel or General Martin Dempsey, General Ray Odierno, the NSA people, everybody that I listed on the original report, the whistleblowing report. And Birkenfeld will give a testimony. He will be forced. Maybe, they can claim the fifth. I don't know, but that's even going to be more condemning. But it's all in black and white. The document trail is there, and it's done on a typewriter, so it can't be erased. It's been uploaded and safely secured in a variety of positions. Now, how that responds and how he responds, I would like to get, and I anticipate getting Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, and Birkenfeld in a Skype, if not personal court of law appearance. I anticipate getting Jesselyn Radick, who represented Brad Birkenfeld, who knows my case, who spoke with me, and was communicated with me and was told by Birkenfeld to meet with Bennett and get his material forth.
Okay.
Who Jesselyn Radick now represents Edward Snowden.
Yes.
So Jesselyn Radick represents Ed Snowden. She represented Birkenfeld, and she received all of my information.
She's shipped to Lee Radick, former Inspector General of Public Integrity Section, the U.S. Department of Justice.
I don't know about him. I know she was a prior U.S. Department of Justice attorney who was a whistleblower because she supposedly filed protests about how the Justice Department was prosecuting Mark Lynch. Remember that kid that they had in Afghanistan, the American
Yes.
Afghan jihadi, they called him? Well, they supposedly were violating his constitutional rights, and Jesselyn Radick made protests, and they came after her.
Okay.
Similar to what they did to Valerie Plame. So the worst of the worst is the Bush administration people who I worked for. I was part of that team. So this is not about a Republican loyalty issue at all. These guys were guilty of setting a lot of this up. It just simply was inherited by a lot of the Obama people, and they just ran with it. They continued it. They had a chance to do right and fix it and clean it and examine it, and they never did. I remember sending this material to Romney and Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, and they did nothing with it. And I was doing it because I was a prior Bush administration appointee. I was expecting them to step in and do something about this. And they never did. They covered it up.
I'll mention Mitt Romney, Bain Capital, and many of his accounts and other things. He money launders Afghan drug money, and to my ex-in-law Leonard Millman on the Isle of Cuba, and was seen there during the presidential election getting off the airplane with his KGB daughter's girlfriend, his mistress at the time. And Mitt Romney's cousin is the head of FBI counterintelligence here in Kansas City that was involved in my demise in a car rollover in 2010. So
wow.
Mitt Romney, he's a scumbag, and his cousin's a scumbag, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
This is the problem we have in government. Now, Scott, I'm going to give you all the attention you want between now and the time that you go to trial. When is that?
Well, it's going to be probably in the next 30 to 90 days. I guess more 90 days because it has to be brought up in the Florida court. And I'll let you know, but I anticipate all of this stuff coming back into the courtroom, and it's being introduced as an ineffective assistance of counsel. And I'm basically saying all of my rights as a military officer were violated, and all of my rights as a citizen were violated. You violated stop and seizure. You illegally held me. You violated posse comitatus, which is incidentally is the defining law that prevents the federal military for stepping into the states and engaging in federal military operations. So posse comitatus was designed to prevent the military from coming in and doing police state roles and such like that.
You better get that done before Jade Helm.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's the precedent. If they get away with doing what they did to me, they'll be allowed to do Jade Helm. But if it's thrown out, then it opens up the door for other challenges to say, you can't do this Jade Helm operation. But they can if they're invited, if the governors of the states and the legislators, if they give them the authority.
Okay, now we have somebody here, I believe that a caller, we get those. Can we take a question from a caller at 570? Are you there?
Yeah, hold on.
People are starting to get to know the call-in number, so
I was just wondering phone number for the network, how to get in touch with the network.
Are you listening to the show right now?
I'm listening to it on the. I called up the phone. I thought this was I had a number. I called to speak to the network, and I heard the radio station. I thought I might have had the wrong number for a call, and
I have a question for Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, former Congresswoman, or federal whistleblower Scott Bennett.
Yeah. Does it matter if one is a U.S. citizen or a U.S. national? Do U.S. citizens have any rights whatsoever, or are they just lower than whale shit? Or do you need to be an American national to have any rights?
Cynthia, do you want to answer that one?
Well, I don't exactly appreciate the distinction, but the conclusion is about the same. Looks like only the political elite are the ones who have rights in this country, but I don't think that's what the caller was trying to...
What I'm saying is, how my understanding is, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're nothing but a creation of the Congress that created in 1871. They created all the U.S. citizens. Now,
you're getting into the common law stuff. Is that where you're going with this? Yeah, you're going to common law, and if you're following common law or any of that right now out there, it doesn't exist. We have U.S. laws now. Common law doesn't exist in the U.S. We can argue it. We can go all day long on this. It comes down to you can't prosecute anybody under common law. You can't get in the courts under common law or any of this. Matter of fact, FBI Division Number 5 stooges, COINTELPRO are out there holding meetings all over the place from time to time, and we'll teach you common law. And with that said, I'm going to let you go. Now, Cynthia, Scott.
Yes. Well, I thinking about the prospects of Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush becoming our next president, it just seems to me that, okay, and more likely, I think, Jeb, is this corruption and treason like a shot of heroin that these folk, now have become hooked on?
Well, there certainly is a lot of skeletons in the closet and a lot of blood drops that can be traced back to Bush and Jeb Bush and a lot of the Bush family. I won't go into all the details and the stuff that I've, discovered and come to know. I'll just say there's a lot of things that are now coming out and people that are slowly gelling together that deal with the last 15, 20 years. And that's a small window. That's not daunting and overwhelming. And the bad guys try and present it as something that should be forgotten. No, I think we have a right to go back 20 years and examine the entire snapshot of what's happened. The metamorphosis of the American identity in the last 20 years has really been akin to the story of Dorian Gray, right? You remember the picture on the wall turns old and ugly and the real person maintains the same. Well, the American identity, the American image of our country, what we've become, as you were sensitive to pick up on, Cynthia, that's been metamorphosized into a monstrosity, into an ugly corruption of drugs in Afghanistan and destroying the whole Middle Eastern sandcastle construction. Yes. That was erected after 25, 30, 35, 40. But they were together. They had themselves together. They were self-ruling. They ruled under dictatorships because they had been ruled under the Turkish Empire, prior to World War I. and then that was all dissolved, but they had gotten, they were handling their own cultures and their own peoples. We've went in and just totally destroyed all those sandcastles. And what do you have now? Chaos.
Yes.
Bad guys who are radical, furious, and they're also being used as contractors for these black operations. And you have, Mossad, CIA stepping in to capitalize on this vacuum. That's who we've become. And I don't think the American people are in support of that at all. I don't think the American people had any desire for what's happened to them in the last 15 years. Had they known had they known that the whole 9/11 thing was, as Alan Zabrowski has said, a complete Mossad CIA scam, funny business operation that's just now coming to light. Just now you're seeing a lot of the material evidence coming together with regards to the falling of Building 7 and the Twin Towers, and was it internal detonations, internal demolitions, and the splicing together of the physical evidence and the records and the videos, and splicing that together with the testimony from Barbara Honegger and Susan Lindauer and some of these other people that are very reasonable and intelligent and experienced in the government intelligence sectors. You walk away going, it's absolutely impossible for the official story to have happened. And that means something else happened. So
That's
what
right.
was that something else? Let's look at that. And no one on Capitol Hill has done that. That could be a trigger for a lot of the new political leadership that rises in this country, because they're using this as a platform to say, wait a minute, this event in 2001, which was a false flag fake event, it's similar to saying the 355 planes that invaded Pearl Harbor really weren't Japanese. They were all CIA contractors. Mm-hmm. It's akin to finding out that level of surprise. And that's essentially what Rebecca Roth and a lot of people who've put together some very reasonable arguments that are based on physical evidence and testimony and pilot training and all of the material that's never been officially recognized or officially investigated. That's the treason too. Our institutions of government have never reviewed the murder of American citizens. There's no statute of limitations on murder. So that still warrants an investigation, and it could be applied to the United Nations. You could have war crimes. I mean, who's to say that can't happen against the United States and some of our political figures? It very easily can. Just because it happened to Milosevic, you don't think it can happen to Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney or Bush? Of course it can. So we could be coming to a day of reckoning for a lot of this stuff, because a lot of what happened in 2001 has led us down this crusade, and I use the word crusade
advisedly.
Yeah, because they perhaps didn't intend it to be perceived as a religious crusade, but that's precisely how it was interpreted by those indigenous peoples. And the Israeli Mossad intelligence apparatus knew that, and the American, puppet basically has been channeled into this conflict. And I think Russia and China and Iran are starting to galvanize and consolidate their pieces on the chessboard to brace against us. And I think Europe is going to go the way of Russia, China, and Iran. I don't think they're going to side with the United States, because what are we about? We're about war and conflict and industrial military operations. That's not peace. That's not prosperity. And as you know, Cynthia, the founding fathers of the United States said to ensure the domestic tranquility. We've lost our tranquility. We've lost our desire for tranquility. We are instead pursuing the opposite of tranquility. There's another example of political leadership totally senile. And I say that advisedly. I think we have an age and a population of men up on Capitol Hill that are suffering Alzheimer's or dementia or just complete madness that need to be removed, and a new generation step up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in 100% agreement with you. And Scott, when you spoke of, and Cynthia, when you spoke of Clintons and Bushes, I've had Larry Nichols on here, and he was involved in in midst to it, working for APTA and, you know, the guns and drugs and Iran-Contra and everything else that went on in Arkansas and the murders and Tidali North and the Bush crime syndicate, Daddy Bush, Jeb Bush, Neil Bush was involved, all with the Silverado connections, and then you had BCCI connections, which encompassed Charles Keating and Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and all the stuff that sent Keating to jail, by the way, for 2 years. And you get into that was the old money laundering angles, and I'm in agreement with Scott, because there's no statute of limitations on the narcotics importation. There's no statute of limitations on the money laundering. There's no statute of limitations on murder under the Barclay-Cohen-Indenture Act, which is a shipment of such as fighter jets, Apache helicopters, and M1 tanks out of St. Louis, Missouri by Daddy Bush, Leonard Millman, Gunther Russbacher, and the others that were involved in this during the 1980s. There's no statute of limitations on that Barclay-Cohen-Indenture, which is treason. And all this other stuff, the attack on America, we all know. And I mean, I could bring, if I could get before a United States grand jury, I could bring people in that can prove the Star Wars hit those buildings. This was the death ray, E-Systems, Area S4, Area 52, Las Vegas, outside of Las Vegas, because of that power plant out there, you know, the Hoover Dam. Years ago, they ran 4 of those generators out there to that area. That's where they got the energy for this. And they bounced it off these satellites, part of the new Star Wars technologies that took those towers down. I was told that the day after 9/11 by a top-level Pentagon official, okay? And I had John Lear on here that knows that happened, and he's been told repeatedly by various people, and I had him on here no more than a couple weeks ago talking about this. I mean, basically, a combination of what all three of us know here, and many other people that are still living that are whistleblowers and others that have fought against this evil crime syndicate, comes down to it's the Israeli, Bush, Clinton crime syndicate that's all combined, and we've got these 2 crime syndicate members running for president of the United States, and they've ordained Jeb Bush to jet. Hillary's just a sidekick. She's a wannabe insane. She's, pardon the expression, batshit crazy, criminally insane. Mm-hmm. And she's a wannabe that won't ever be. And as her statement was when Barack Obama beat her, she says, and don't take offense to this, Cynthia, at all, because I'm not a racist, but her words, because I have someone that heard her say this when she lost that night. She says, I was beat by an effing inner. And she went nuts. I mean, this is how crazy this woman is. And she expects to become, and Jeb Bush, he is running the 5 drug cartels in the world. The 5 drug cartels. And, you know, you were asking earlier, Cynthia, about the situation pertaining to, as an example, can you get in office? I believe that if we did not have E-Systems of Dallas, Texas, controlling these West Star satellite systems, that they've been in control of, private contractor, once again, Daddy Bush, Raytheon, on the board of directors, and that whole crime syndicate that is operating, where they operate Division Number 4 hit teams for the CIA out of Raytheon, E-Systems, if they did not incorporate and had not incorporated that Inslaw software that was designed, you know, by the Hamiltons for the prosecutor software, and if Ted Gunderson's sidekick, Raymond Lavas, had not designed that for 7 years up in Washington, made it to where that they could twist light and sound in midair and incorporate in those West Star satellite systems, which control the electronic voting machines, we could have fair elections. But we can't get them, as far as I'm concerned, until we throw the machines out and go back to hand-counted ballots.
Well, you know, you're right on that, Stu, because in my last election, which was 2006, people all over the state of Georgia voted in my congressional House election. And obviously that means people outside of my congressional district had the opportunity to vote for or against me. And then when we filed the lawsuit trying to get information on how those votes were treated, we requested the election data, and the expert witness for the state of Georgia said that you can't get the election data because it belongs to Diebold, which is the company that owned the electronic machines in Georgia. And furthermore, you just have to trust that the person we announce as the winner was the winner.
Trust, right.
That's right. Well, anyway, I have one more question before our time is up. And I know our time just got up, but the last question, Scott, is how do we take our country back?
Well, we take it back legally and constitutionally and patriotically by having leaders stand up and lead the charge forward, such as yourself, such as others who have served in the military, and those who haven't. But a lot of the military guys who are now in Congress, like Tom Cotton and some of these other guys who I've written to and sent my material to, are not worth anything because they're too invested in war. They're too invested in this mission. They're too psychologically connected to redeeming themselves by, quote, some sort of victorious end to this. And that's a fantasy. You have to be mature and adult and say, sometimes we need to put the brakes on entirely and shift directions and make a radical alteration of course, or else the entire wagon is going to go off the cliff. And the United States is very close, I think, psychologically and economically to going off the cliff, because anyone who believes that we can go around the world and shove democracy down Middle Eastern culture in people's throats, or somehow transform them into whatever model of appropriate, tolerant Muslim identity is a fool or a fantasist, and they shouldn't be allowed, certainly in any military or political office, because it's trying to go and change other people and other cultures, and it's impossible. And if you're going to do that, there's a certain way to do that. The British Empire did it in 1849 and 1870, but that was before the internet and before a lot of the video. So we don't have that capability, and we wouldn't do that. But we need leaders to stand up in their churches and stand up in their synagogues and their mosques and their religious institutions and their veterans groups or any other community institution, club, social activity in their professional vocations or academics. They need to consolidate and create teams and take back their communities one step at a time, one town at a time, one precinct at a time. And I think, perhaps you're the first Paul Revere, Cynthia, who's the one person in Congress who has really got the guts and the intelligence to sort of look at this and examine it and say we need to explore and define and really draw all this out. And I'm unafraid of doing it, and you're probably one of the few who is willing to do that, but other men and women will see your example and follow your example. And that's what leadership is. Leaders stand when no one else will stand. Leaders lead. Leaders have strength, they have charisma, they have power, they're unafraid. If you're gonna die, go down blazing. Go down to fight. Do not go on your knees. Do not go as a slave to money and addiction or whatever else that they bribe you with, but go down fighting and fight for your children, fight for your families, fight for your future heritage. Otherwise, we are rapidly approaching a police state where you've got the, quote, enlightened political leaders who really aren't that philosophically intelligent, really aren't that well educated, really don't have the charisma or the temperament of a true statesman, as Aristotle or Plato would expect. They're just, rich, wealthy guys who buy their way in. Well,
Yes.
That's not what true political leaders are. True political leaders stand up and, chart the course and are all about truth. And we have to be about peace. We can't be all about every enemy or someone who Israel labels as its enemy is not automatically an enemy of the United States of America. We need to get beyond and separate that. That's been one of the afflictions for the past 50 years. And I'm very, very educated in the American Christian revelational discourse. And the major propaganda has been this Schofield Bible teaching that the American Western Israel destiny is linked at the hip. And whatever Israel does, we need to support. We need to defend. That's been a recipe for disaster. And, Alan Zabrowski has some good points in it. We need to separate from that. And that doesn't mean it's certainly not anti-Semitic, and I'm not that at all. But we need to look at who is running these countries, and Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud, I think it was Barak, who was at 9/11 when that first happened. You could see and sense that they knew about this. The 5 Israelis and the dancing Israelis who were videotaping the event, who were later identified as Mossad operatives, who said, "We're here to videotape the event."
Yes.
There's all sorts of dirtiness, but we have to be bold and rise to the surface and be fearless. I can't wait to get back into a courtroom and can't wait to pin against the wall all of these politicians who received my material and did nothing. And I hope the American mothers and fathers will come around and demand the same thing from every member who represented them. And a few of them are doing it already. But that's the only way we're going to get better people in office, is to remove the dross that currently occupies.
And Scott, you made a good point of the Israeli thing with the evangelical crowd out here and the Christian crowd, because if anybody just Googles what's called the genome factor, done by Johns Hopkins University about 3 years ago, and this was done by a Jewish man, we'll say Jewish, but Semitic, Judeo, and he found that 8 out of 10 of them in Israel are from the European area, Khazar, Ukraine, all throughout Europe, and Russia, and that they are not Semitic. They are not the Judaic tribe, that the Palestinians, 8 out of 10 of them are the true Jews, according to the Bible.
Yes.
So people have to understand this, and they point to this, and I mean, evangelicals out here, you take the Pat Robertsons, and I name names. I hold nothing. You take those fruitcakes,
right?
And he's been identified as taking $100 million of people's money years ago. Greg Palast exposed him on this, and then going and buying his diamond mine and making one plane load of food and raised $100 million to buy his diamond mine. He owns the Bank of Scotland at $2.5 million. I mean, that's money laundering. I know somebody in behalf of the Bushes that actually money laundered for him, took his evangelical money and moved it into Swiss banks. Gabby Bush got his cut for the whole deal, and it was all covered up. And then you take this John Hagee and look at the amount of money he's gotten from all this, I forgot what they call it. It's one of the spin-offs of Israel, that supporting evangelicals. I mean, people have got to wake up.
Yeah.
They got to wake up in this country, because we've got half the people, I believe, out here somewhat awake, and the other half are deadhead because they're sitting there listening to that propaganda machine all day long, which is, or not all day long, but the TV. They listen to CNN, Fox News, the others, and Fox News is nothing but a Israeli outlet. And when you really look at the media, of which I did, I mean, when I caused 4 congressional investigations back to back between 89 and 91, and was able to get that done and had the media behind me, like, Jonathan Beatty with Time Magazine. I had Denver Post, Rocky Mountain News, everybody breathing up everybody, and the list went on. After they made me a political prisoner, all that shifted in 93, 94. And we couldn't get anything done. Even Henry Gonzalez, House banking chairman, he couldn't get the media attention that he was trying to get. And Cynthia McKinney here, when she was in office, pushing on 911, she couldn't get the media attention it deserved, and she deserved. You know? And they've taken over this media, so it's the alternative media, and now we see all the Mossad-ridden and FBI-ridden media out here, the Veterans Today, the Alice Joneses, the different ones that are putting out propaganda, pure propaganda. And, it's, the people have to get to a point that they're tired of this and we have to rise up. And I've been maintaining for the past 3 years, because I got behind the men in Colorado that said, Stu, I need help. We're doing a recall on one of our Congress people out here that is a gun-grabbing idiot, violating our Second Amendment right. They pounced immediately on that, helped the guy out, the people in Colorado, after I put him and got him attention, and they were able to recall 2 congressmen. They went after a third one that said you can't have guns in Colorado, basically, and they were able to do recall on that.
Yeah.
Simple. That's what we need to be doing to this United States Congress and Senate. Rip them all out of there.
Well, one of the things you're doing well, Stu, is you're setting up roundtables like this where very intelligent people like Cynthia McKinney and others can gather around and discuss these and do it on the internet for the average person to watch on their, as it's replayed. They are beginning to turn off a lot of the television and find interesting conversations of truth and knowledge and from honest people who are speaking from the cuff, but also, are preparing their remarks. They're making reasonable, educated choices. They're presenting evidence and analysis and documentation. That's where we are teaching, and Cynthia knows this. She teaches her staff every time she went into her office and her staff gathered round like chicks around a mother hen. She told them what to do and how to do it and she was a military commander. She was making sure everything was running and functional, and she was mothering them and also, requiring things from them. And that was her team. Well, you are doing the same thing, Stu, by gathering us together and really expanding the team for other Americans. I say every American who listens to your show and is aware of this material needs to support people like Cynthia. They need to go to their town hall meetings with cell phones and record their interactions and record them saying, Congressman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, I'm reporting to you a whistleblowing material report that relates to terrorist financing, Swiss banks, Edward Snowden, Scott Bennett, and all sorts of other stuff. I'm putting it on the record. It's being recorded. What do you have to say? I've got a copy of the letter here, and you were sent it. You didn't respond. You covered it up. What have you got to say? How can you occupy that seat and call yourself an American congressman or senator and have committed treason? And that's what you have done. Getting that on the record and videotaped and uploading it to YouTube is key, because can you imagine what would happen if you walked into a town hall meeting and say, I'm recording this, Senator, what have you got to say? And they fell apart like a cheap watch. They ran off the stage. They stuttered and stammered and fell apart. That would cause every American watching it to go, aha, they're a liar. They're dirty. They're corrupt. Get rid of them. Who can we put in? Cynthia McKinney. Put her in. She's the only one honest. Or John Doe or whoever it may be. That's how we change our country, is one cell phone recording at a time and uploading it onto websites like your Veterans Truth Radio and your Veterans Truth platform. Everybody can upload those reports, and everybody will start coming to it for sources of information and writing off the false propagandists, whether it's Alex Jones or some of the other ones that may be, inventing or spinning things.
I have a very good point. I myself, and Manuel Cleaver, Cynthia, Kansas City.
Yes.
I attacked him verbally inside when they were going to attack Syria, and said, look, proof and evidence is here. The videotapes are here to prove that the Syrian government did not gas its own people, but it was Al-Qaeda, ISIS. And I went before, and they had 3 TV cameras down here in Kansas City, or 4, whatever it was, stations covered it. And I laid it out to him that I'm coming back here. If you vote for that war to attack Syria, I'm coming after you, and I'm going to recall you. I made it quite clear.
Yeah.
And of course, they never covered that, and I couldn't get any friends to go down there with me, and at the last minute. And the only reason I knew about this so-called town hall meeting, his very first ever town hall meeting, was the fact that one of his aides called me because he heard that I was asking for national demonstrations. In some cities, they had 50,000 over it, which was great. But we pushed that and pushed that and pushed that, and the Congress, the Senate was half scared to death because here was the videotaped evidence, here was the videotape, and people got by the millions and went after him. But it changed his way of thinking and his way of voting after that. I saw him sit down. They were asking, well, how are you going to vote? He says, well, after the things I've heard tonight, I think I'm going to have to analyze this and go back and examine things. And it is. It's getting in their faces.
Yep, that's right.
That's right. We've got to start doing it. The American people have to do this.
And college kids and high school kids who are the youngest but full of the most passion, vim and vigor, piss and vinegar, are looking for leaders who are looking to start fights for the right reasons and for Constitution preserving reasons and for freedom preserving reasons. These young people between, 15 and 35, they're looking for leaders who will stand up and say, I'm not looking for a retirement, or I'm not looking just to play the politician. I'm looking to get into a fight. Who's with me? And young people will get behind men and women who have that audacity and that ferocity. So that will make up for the money thing. I think, Cynthia, if you went on a stage and presented that aura, these rich, wealthy millionaires would just evaporate as effeminate, neutered, androgynous weaklings, because you'd have the energy behind you, and young people would go, I'm still forming in my political opinions, but I love her energy. I love her boldness. I love her truth, her honor. Yes. I'm just going to follow her because she's looking for a fight. And that's what young people want.
Well, Scott, thank you. We've kept you for over 2 hours, and it's been great. I still have a zillion more questions, which we can do at another time.
Certainly.
But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and, sharing yourself with us and with the country. And I know that it takes a toll on your family. It takes a toll on you. You have to be really strong, but you sound like you got every bit of strength you need to see it through.
The Lord sees me through.
And Scott, I'm going to ask everybody to keep praying for you, keep you safe, and
yes,
well, because I know there's a God and I know He works. And,
that's right.
I'm just telling you, anytime you need the airtime, you just holler at me, and you've got my number here, and we'll bring you back on and keep people up to date on the particular case that you've got going on down there.
That's right.
Make sure
I appreciate it, Stu. I appreciate it.
Yeah, because there's very few whistleblowers alive today, man. I've seen 50 of them buried in the past 30 years.
Yeah.
And with that said, you got any final words?
Well, as you just said that, but my faith is to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So whenever He calls me home, He'll call me home. But I'm going to go down fighting, and I'm never going to back down, and I'm never going to be bought off. And I'm going to take this forward for the benefit of my fellow military people and citizens. And the day is going to come, and it's all going to be revealed, and men are going to be held to account. And I'm encouraged when I hear from people like yourself and Cynthia who, are willing to stand by me and give me the support and encouragement, because that gives me hope that this country really has some good people, who want to fight and preserve their freedoms. So I appreciate your help very much.
There's a million people listening to us tonight. That's the average I'm getting on my show live. Some of them get lost after, their numbers may drop to 850 after we've had cyber terrorism, and they'll come back and listen to the archives, but they also do that. So hopefully we'll get a lot of people and putting a lot of attention on this. And Scott, you're going to be a writer. You're going to stick up a few stories up on our website, and so Cynthia McKinney, and of course she's talked about becoming a host in the future here in the fall, and that would be great. And Cynthia, you know, you're going to play co-host with me for a while with a couple more whistleblowers too, aren't we?
Yes, that's right.
That's right. We're going to hold hearings, unofficial hearings.
Unofficial hearings. That's right.
That's right.
Well, thank you, Scott.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
And folks, this is Stu Webb, and I'm just going to ask, we do have a fundraiser drive going on. We do have a benefactor that's agreed to give us $5,000 if we can raise $5,000 from our listening audience. We're only short $3,000. We have about, I think, 19 or 20 days left. So if everybody would kick in $1 or 50 cents that are listening tonight, there is a donation button on there. That will give us everything we need to ensure that we never get cyber attacked. Plus, it will give us the software that we need